charged for Schedule 8 crimes, including rape, murder, will soon have to have their DNA collected and captured on the national database. It's part of the Criminal Amendment Act, which comes into effect from the 31st of January. For more on the significance of this, we're joined by gender activist and researcher at the University of Johannesburg, Lisa Vetten, and community safety activist Ian Cameron. Good evening to both of you, and thanks for your time. It's been some years in the making, this piece of legislation. What does it mean, the fact that it will now finally become law? Lisa, let me begin with you.
It will be very important in terms of helping us populate and expand the national DNA database. And why that's important is because there are a certain number of crimes which are committed. It's the same person committing the same crimes. And if you don't have a DNA database, you can't always link them, which means that somebody perhaps is released on a crime when they shouldn't be. We had the recent example in the Western Cape of somebody who would have served a couple of months for assault, but when they ran his DNA through the database, they actually linked him to a whole number of rapes in the Western Cape. So now he's gone to prison for a number of years instead. And so that's very useful because quite clearly that man, had this not been found out, would very likely have continued to rape. So that's really the significance of it, is being able to link crimes and potentially remove people who are committing a number of rapes. So it is beneficial from that point of view.
Ian, one of the biggest challenges that often we face as a country when it comes to, this great legislation that we're able to put in place is how it is implicated on a very practical level in police stations. How is this likely to change the protocol of processing the offenders that qualify, those that have committed Schedule 8 crimes?
I think the most important part for the public to understand first, and I agree with what Lisa said, but just to add on to it, is that DNA probably remains as one of the most effective, if not the most effective, crime-fighting tools that we have to stop, especially violent crime in South Africa. So, it's important for police members, especially on ground level, to understand, but to also be trained as to how they should approach the collection of DNA, who is involved where in the process, etc. I think very often we have seen it, I've experienced it personally, where members don't always understand how to approach certain types of scenes, how to approach victims, even how to approach perpetrators when it comes to the forensic process that is part of the investigation. So crucial that we need to emphasize this on ground level and ensure that members on ground level get the needed training as soon as possible. It's one thing to have a piece of legislation like this promulgated. It's crucial, though, that when it's promulgated, that those that need to implement it know exactly how.
So in addition to then just the retraining of the officers, Lisa, what is the other infrastructure support that police are going to need in order to be able to do this effectively?
It's massively significant. Firstly, they need to do something about their backlog. As we know, they're already running behind with cases that are live and active, and they still haven't found a suspect. So now they're behind on that, and now you're asking them to add a whole lot of new samples from those who are imprisoned and about to be released. So we already have one potential bottleneck there, which talks about capacity at the forensic science laboratory. Then there are other links in the chain that also need to be complied with. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the research that we did looking nationally at rape dockets in 2012 and how the police were managing and dealing with them. And there we found that probably in 1 out of every rape cases that were reported, there was no sexual assault evidence crime kit collected. So you're already losing cases there because a kit is not collected. Then you're losing more cases because roughly about 1 in 5 of the kits which are collected are not even sent to the forensic laboratory. So you're losing still more opportunities there. Then there's the third problem, is that when those kits arrive, you can't always isolate DNA from the sample. So we found that in about 52% of cases, you could isolate DNA, and therefore you had forensic evidence to work with. But in almost half, 48%, you couldn't isolate the DNA. So you lose that potential number of cases to be able to analyze. And in some instances, that's because the DNA has degraded. It hasn't been stored properly. But it might also be the situation that going back to our research, we found about half of victims had actually urinated before they were examined, and about 42% had already bathed or showered. So you're already going to lose DNA there. So there's a whole lot of these different little links in the chain that you've got to look at if you're going to make this meaningful. So you'll have the legislation, but unless we change police practice, both at the investigative level, as well as at the forensic science laboratories, as well as at hospitals, this is not going to have the impact we'd like. And I think lastly, we do need to help educate people about the importance of preserving DNA. But what you've also got to make sure is that that the police are getting them to the hospital and clinic facilities as soon as possible, because it's quite understandable the rape complainant is not going to want to sit and wait 3 days unwashed before she gets taken to a hospital. So there's a whole lot of other parts that we need to fix up before we get this legislation working to its full power.
Ian, with that context, I mean, are you expecting that come the 1st of February, police stations should be equipped with the necessary tools to be able to collect DNA in a way that will benefit the cases that are under investigation?
I expect that they should be, but I don't expect that they will be. Unfortunately, I don't see the urgency from the Minister of Police and his team to really nail this. If we look at the DNA backlog, just the figures that Lisa mentioned now, and we look at about September, October of 2021, we had a backlog of about 240,000 cases. Now, I know that's not exactly what we're referring to here now, but all of these things are somehow connected, and it's a massive amount of information that doesn't only need to be managed, coordinated, etc., but that needs to eventually go to a court, that needs to be used for successful prosecution. And we see with something like rape in South Africa that there's a less than 3% successful prosecution rate. And so the issue won't only be with the police. It would also be, we also would need to look at the prosecuting authority and how they communicate with each other. So unfortunately, I don't see it changing drastically. I obviously hope it will, and I obviously hope it will make an impact. But we honestly need a leadership change in the South African Police Service. We still have many great members on ground level. Unfortunately, also, if you go look at detectives, for example, I'm going to use the Cape Flats as a recent example where I spent some time. You speak to some of the detectives there, many of them have around 400 cases or 400 dockets on their table at one time. It's impossible to keep the morale healthy on ground level and to keep members motivated, never mind train them. So I think it's a heavy task. I don't want to be unnecessarily pessimistic, but unfortunately, I don't think we have the political will or the leadership at the moment in the South African Police Service to really see this be successful. I think the last thing important to mention is that we've also, we want to know what happened to the idea of public-private partnerships. I think it's a glamorous opportunity for government to say, but how can we welcome other institutions to assist us with this huge backlog and challenge that we have? It's a good way to build relationships and hopefully ensure some kind of justice for victims that are out there.
Community safety activist Ian Cameron, and of course researcher and gender activist at the University of Johannesburg, Lisa Vetten there.